Companies Act, a special presentation by The Firm.
Hello and welcome to Companies Act. This week, we're going to focus on Chapter 3, Prospectus and Allotment of Securities, Chapter 4, Share Capital and Debentures, and Chapter 5, Acceptance of Deposits. And to do that, I have with me an expert panel of M&M's V.S. Parthasarathy, TV Raghunath of Kotak, and Manan Lahoty of Luthra. Gentlemen, to all three of you, a very warm welcome. There are many firsts in Chapter 3. For the first time, it defines public offer. It also defines private placement, but we'll get to that in just a bit. And for the first time, it includes not just listed companies, but also companies which intend to get their securities listed.
The first and foremost thing to understand about Chapter 3 is it's achieved three things. One, it has widened the disclosure and levels of disclosure, enhancing transparency and accountability on the past of the company. Second, alongside that, it has importantly widened the ambit of regulation, dragging in some private companies, some intending to list companies. So it's widened all the types of instruments. So it's widened the ambit of regulation. Third, arising from that is obviously accountability from a different level of punitive to deterrent to criminal. There's a different league of regulation on penalties for non-compliance. So there's a tripod of changes, so to speak. So if you look at it from that dimension, yes, the new Act, Chapter 3, has gone beyond what 56 Act had covered. First and foremost, it does cover very explicitly private companies and all kinds of capital issuances by private companies. Secondly, companies intending to list, which is an interesting new coinage in terms of a law, will also be covered by SEBI. It's an important dimension. But what it stops short of clarifying is, when is the intention relevant? 5 years earlier, my intention to list also brings me within the ambit of SEBI, or I have a documented evidence that I'm intending to list. So when do you get trapped under a SEBI ambit or not?
Especially you've seen companies, they would think of filing a DRHP to list and then eventually realizing that maybe the market is not good enough for listing and they want to do a round of private equity. So, I mean, is the intention to list no more there? What kind of documentation they need to have in place to actually rebut a presumption of intention to listing? I think it is going to definitely cause some problems. People have to be careful. But more importantly, like TV said, you know, this section, or rather this chapter, goes beyond intention to listing. It covers private companies. So I think those companies need to be careful anyway.
Okay. Partha, is that how you see it from an operational point of view? When you read those words, look, lawyer, investment banker, when you read it, did it set off alarm bells in your head?
I think the scope is expanded, certainly. You know, private companies come, but it is not as if, you know, it's changed dramatically from that point of view. However, as I hear TV and Manan talk about intention to list,
now
it actually
brings
alarm bells. Now it is the interpretation of somebody sitting. And you know what happens when interpretations are done later, post facto.
In the Companies Act 1956, Schedule 2 listed all the disclosures to be made in a prospectus. The 2013 Act lists them in Section 26 and in the rules. Combined, the two make for a long list of disclosures required, including all sources of promoter funds.
First and foremost is, I think there are three broad categories where the disclosures or prospectus has become one. One is the source of fund, and I want to talk about it. Litigations of 5 years, and now that throws another set of issues on the table. And the third one is the, as they call it, I'm just using the word, reading it, actually, adverse remarks or reservations in financial statements. There are these three aspects. First is sources of funds. Now, if it's a body corporate, we are by and large little better off because they will have traceability to where they borrow, what happens. But if it is individual promoter, what happens? How fungible is the fund and how are you going to do? And is it going to be self-declaration? As a CFO, how am I going to do the due diligence? I mean, these are all the kind of questions to say that how do we, you know, make this happen? The second one is litigation. Are we talking about every litigation being, you know, till it is cleared, we're going to state it? What level of litigations are we talking about? And there is more to it. And the last one is, as a CFO or as an auditor, nobody would remember the terms adverse remarks or reservation. We understand qualifications are, you know, so none of these terms are very clear. So a lot of ambiguity around here. and which needs a lot more clarity. And now SEBI and others will also get into the act in terms of interpreting this.
Yeah,
so this is a fairly complex one and a little onerous actually.
In fact, to build on what Partha just said, and let me give you a practical trouble that we will face. Full details of own sources of funds of a promoter is the language. Imagine a company that is 50 or 70 or 80 years old. There are many unlisted government companies. There are some unlisted banks which are 70 years old. Now, where are you going to trace? Even the bank which routed that money, even if it was through a bank, will never be able to supply details for the merchant banker or the lawyer to sign off that this is full details of the source of promoter contribution. So how far authentication goes? Because it says full details of own sources of funds, especially if you're not talking of a young company.
Yeah.
And let's say Hindustan.
Young company, it's resolvable, because if you're only 5 years old, then there's really not much to worry about.
Even the banking system may not have those records.
I get the point,
right? So it's a huge procedural issue. In the same vein, litigations. Earlier it used to be pending litigations, right? However old it is, but it should be pending.
Yeah, so it has to be an open case.
Now, even a closed litigation, it may have started 20 years back. So you need to go back in the 5 years, what all were pending, even if closed. Hence, it's going to elongate the level of diligence and disclosure requirements into that.
Yeah.
So they're very procedurally
and adverse
challenging.
remarks. So I suspect if you're a company that's 5 years old, you're going to surmount all of this fairly easily. If you're a company that's unfortunately 15, 20, 25, 30, 40 years old, you're going to get, well, you know.
And think about punishments and class action lawsuits.
Well then, let's get to punitive measures. Any contravention of Section 26 could result in fines and imprisonment of up to 3 years. Criminal liabilities for misstatements in a prospectus include an up to 10-year prison term under Section 447 for every person who authorizes the issue of such prospectus. But useful defences are also provided for. Section 35 says the company, its directors, promoters, and even experts quoted in the prospectus are liable to pay compensation for all losses due to misleading statements in the prospectus. The defences provided here are more limited. If an intent to defraud is proven, then the liability in such a circumstance is unlimited. The punishment for fraudulently inducing people to invest money also includes an up to 10-year prison term. And then there's Section 37, the first provision in the 2013 Act for a class action suit.
For a moment, if you leave class action apart, I just wanted to throw this question. If you read Section 63 of the old Act, it also had civil, it also had criminal. So why is this, unlimited and suits apart? Is there a major change?
Let me try and answer that question. See, under the previous Act, Section 62 was more relevant because that spoke about civil liability. It also came with 3 or 4 very important defenses. And 1 or 2 of them used to be directors or the promoters, whoever is litigated against, could always say, could actually prove a case of reasonable belief. So if you, as a director, had reasonable belief that the statement was true, or if it was made by an expert, that the expert was a competent person to make such a statement, that was a valid defense. Those 2 defenses have been taken out.
So therefore, Manan, what I was wanting to point out, it's not so much the change as the defense is being taken out.
So there are only 2 defenses now, if I understand that correctly, right? That he's withdrawn his consent before the issue of the prospectus. And that it was issued without his authority or consent, and that the prospectus was issued without his knowledge or consent. Those are the only 2 defenses. But the defense which you said, which might have been reasonable belief, no longer exists. Does it exist under the 447 bit? 447, right?
See,
is the
I think you would like, if as an investor you want to go against the company or the directors, you would use 35 and 36, maybe 37 class action lawsuits. We can always come to that later on. But I don't think you would go under 447 for misstatements, because there's a specific remedy available in Chapter 3 itself. So your best case would be under 35, 36.
But in 34 it says that every person who authorizes the issue of such prospectus shall be liable under Section 447.
There are 2 grounds on which an issuer who is in default can be prosecuted. One is the criminal side, which is 34. The other is the civil side. Okay. Who can get prosecuted under 34, which goes to 447, which includes criminal?
Which includes fraud. 447 has to do with fraud, right?
It is a person who authorized the issue of the prospectus, and the regulator or the ministry itself can take action.
Okay, that's how you read this. Okay.
35,
which is
anybody who suffered
civil
damages,
yeah.
Anybody who suffered damages can go against any of the people listed in it,
yeah, so
which
that
includes
director,
experts,
promoter, experts, yeah.
and he can claim damages only.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is also that bit of unlimited liability.
That's always been there, fraudulent inducement,
yeah,
right? That's always been there. And it's kind of been used, but it's more criminal in nature and it's not...
So there's nothing much to be alarmed of. So it's the loss
That's not new.
It has got concerns. Sorry.
Yeah.
If I were to come in. Firstly, it talks of words, again, interpretationally nightmarish, recklessly. Who judges on recklessness is a moot point. More importantly, it covers credit facilities also. Fraudulently and recklessly induces somebody to make available credit facilities also gets covered.
Yeah, okay.
So in a country which has a little bit of lapses in processes in a lending institution, this can play havoc.
Any comment at the end of this on what the prospectus issue finally looks like in the 2013 Act versus 1956?
See, in terms of disclosures, really, what SEBI, what Companies Act has done is still given SEBI the primary role of deciding what should be disclosed. I mean, it's obviously brought in some new things that we just discussed, but largely I don't see the prospectus would change the way it looks.
Okay.
I think there will be some additional stuff on, for example, identification of promoters, the sources of funds, of course the liabilities we already discussed, but the prospectus disclosure standard is not changing much. If anything, I think it's slightly better than the previous Act, because previous Act had a schedule with 3 parts. I think we don't have that level of detail just now here. I mean, it could be notified in rules going forward as well, but that's not the case in the current rules.
TV on prospectus? Better off, worse off?
There is an indirect issue which has emanated, again, I guess unintentional. Section 13(8) read with 27. Variation of objects at any time, at any time being the keyword, vis-a-vis the purpose for which the prospectus was issued, and variation of contracts. Now, firstly, it's at any time. Secondly, what is the level of variation in the objects that is within the bar and what is above the bar is unknown. And C, variation of contracts. What is variation? Now, you have a provision which says if you want to vary these, go for a special resolution. Most important,
dissenting
shareholders get an exit. But exit by whom? Not
by the promoter.
Yeah, why promoter? Because the company raised the money. Right?
As controlling shareholder. This is not the first time that the shareholder exit appears in this Act. If you look at the incorporation chapters, you will see that it appears there as well.
Conflict of solution versus objective. Because if the company raised the money, and for valid reason, it's got a special resolution through, let us say. If 75% agreed, and those which dissented need to be compensated by whom? The promoter or the company?
Yeah, fair enough. It's an argument we've been through before when we've discussed the first instance of shareholder exit, where everyone said, look, if I've done a special resolution, why do I need to pay off the dissenting shareholders? The majority of these companies agreed to this change. So, last comments on prospectus, Partha, better off, worse off?
Yeah, so a lot of detail to go into, shaking pens, and onerous responsibility on directors and key personnel who are going to, sign off that balance sheet. And coming to your point, I think if it is a listed company, he has exits available. What is the exit that we are talking about? And I'm worried about what is the price fixation that will turn out to be. I know those are all owners. And if it's not listed, what are we talking anyways?
And to whom? The guy originally invested, he may have sold.
No, I get it,
So this is a long
this argument, because shareholder exit, I think, is in 2 or 3 different places. It will come up when we discuss M&A as well. And, I think the same argument holds for each instance, saying if you have approval through special resolution, if this is a listed company, a natural exit is available, why are we going through all this effort to get the promoter to give the dissenting shareholder? Argument well taken, but that's what it is.
Companies Act, a special presentation by The Firm.
The Companies Act 2015 defines private placement for the first time. A company can make any number of private placement offers in a year, but to not more than a total 200 persons in a year for a type of security. This limit excludes QIBs and ESOPs. That's a big jump up from the limit of 49 persons in the 1956 Act. But the 2013 Act is explicit in saying that if an offer is made to more than 200 persons, whether the company intends to list or not, the offer will be considered a public offer. There's more Sahara proofing, as I call it. The name of the offeree is to be recorded by the company prior to sending out the offer letter. The application form must also carry the investor's name, and the investment can be made only by the investor named on the form via his or her bank account. The minimum investment per person is 20,000 rupees of face value. No cash payments, no advertising, no fresh private placement offer till the previous one is closed.
I mean, I think it's much better position to be in than we were when we looked at the draft rules, right? I think there were problems in the draft rules which have been taken care of, except for one. Now there's a minimum application of rupees 20,000 in terms of face value.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for example, if you had a company with a small face value but extremely high book value or the market price, how do you go about this? I mean, you could actually talk about much more than 20,000 rupees. And this compared to what the draft rules said. The draft rules said investment size of 50,000 rupees, which was a much better wording to use, although not a legal term, but still much better term to use than 20,000 rupees as face value.
But is that the only thorn in your side when it comes to private placements? You're mostly happy with everything else that's coming?
Actually, I mean, yeah, on equity side, I'm pretty okay, but on the debt side, probably not. Because what they have done now is, of course, they have included all kind of securities and all kind of companies within private placement. So while you could do a public offering of debentures without taking a special resolution, you can't do a private placement of debentures without taking a social resolution.
Right, yeah.
That's probably a roadkill. It was not really supposed to be, but that's how it's come out to be now.
I was applying my mind over the weekend on if I would apply this to the various placements we do, be it private equity raise in a private company, growth capital, or a QIP. I see a lot of process bugs here.
Illustration?
Now, let me explain how a private limited company, let's say in M&M Group, wants to raise growth capital. The banker is called. He's going to first do what is called a teaser, which explains the profile and scouts it amongst n number of people. Out of that, let's say n by 2 show interest. And then with them you share what is called an information memorandum. Again, no record of who you sent it to, or at least you don't bother to do it. And then go through a diligence process, discover a price, negotiate a contract, and then take it to shareholders. The discovery process, including who the investor is and the pricing, gets firmed up through a process of engagement. Now, if you look at the rules along with section 42, what does it say? Every person I take it to, I need to have a record of it.
Yeah.
More importantly, the placement letter or offer letter needs to be done after I get my shareholder resolution. I need to get a pre-resolution before I issue a placement letter or invitation to subscribe. Now, when does a document become an invitation to subscribe and when it is not is unclear. Is an information memorandum an invitation to subscribe?
Okay.
Right? And if I don't have a price discovery, if you look at the disclosures for the special resolution explanatory statement, I have to disclose who to, the pricing, and the justification thereof. But I'm still yet to discover all that.
Right.
So there is a huge sequencing issue here.
Okay.
And now take it to a QIP format. Okay, QIP gets trapped between a preferential issue of shares, which is 62.
Yeah.
It is non-rights, and 42 because it is a private placement.
Right.
In QIP, price discovery happens in the last, or as you launch the deal, overnight it gets discovered.
So what happens to QIP now with all these processes that you need to follow?
That's right.
Wow. Okay.
So I see process challenges as we execute this.
You didn't seem to think that they were going to be big killers.
I mean, if you come to think of it, the position that we had in the 56 Act was only worse. For example, for executing a QIP transaction. Because you could not go to more than 49 investors, and just what everybody did. The way you would do this is you would break down the entire process into non-deal and deal process. So when you are in the non-deal mode, and that is when you do most of these conversations and don't speak about the transaction really, that is when you don't really invite any subscriptions. So you need to break it down. You know, I totally agree that there are process challenges, and there will be with any new law coming in. And it's very important also for the regulator to be on our side on some of these matters.
Right.
Because I don't think you can market any other way. You know, you can't just identify one person from day one itself. So you will need to speak to many more, but you just need to be non-deal mode versus deal mode, depending on yeah.
The last thing to boot, Menaka, is other process challenge I foresee. In the law, not just the rule, the Act says the allotment shall be completed within 60 days. What happens in situations where there are conditions precedent to closure? Okay. Regulatory permissions to XYZ clearance, they may take CCI clearance, for instance, right? So it may or may not happen in 60 days, and the rules don't change that 60 days.
Yeah.
Nor does it give, like in takeover code, that the clock for closure is subject to the regulatory permissions being in place. It is a hard-edged 60 days.
Got it.
So what if I don't get them in 60 days?
Now let me come to the man who does private placements.
No.
Are you better off because of, as Manan said, look, the 56 Act didn't really give us much to go with, so this is a substantial improvement, at least from the 200 point of view, and the process issues remain.
Yes.
They could have been cleaned up, but they still remain, but we got around it with 56.
I go more with Manan.
Yeah.
Whatever has been the intent and the practice which has been done over a period of time, which is the practical one which has been put in the form of legislation. So broadly, I think they are getting over towards the side where intent is being converted to in terms of law.
Okay.
But having said that, that is where the but comes on the other hand. The procedural issue is where I think the SEBI, etc., coming and saying, yeah, this is workable. And so the first few cases are going to determine how good is this act, or how much of a bottleneck it will prove to be. I'm very hopeful it's going to be the former. It's going to be very smooth in the sense that SEBI is going to sit and look at it, because some of these are SEBI's finding being incorporated into this rule.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Blue chip corporate said the lawyer is right and the investment banker is right. Very good.
Actually, I do tend to agree with Partha. I think a lot of these concerns probably came in from SEBI's comments. And I think while a QIP transaction might be not really affected in terms of the process, if anything, it's just got better. A private equity which is not SEBI regulated probably will have more challenges, given that we don't really have an offer document before you go and start marketing. In a QIP, you would have, you would upload it on the website of the company and stuff.
that will be a little bit more challenging than
For sure.
if you say India.
We wanted to cover chapters 4 and 5, but time's up. So next week, share capital, debentures and deposits.
I see it as a retrogative step and not a positive step from a debenture point of view.
From a country point of view, if it is resulting in small companies not accessing public deposits, I think it's good.
You would almost think that SEBI has written this act.
Companies Act, a special presentation by The Firm.